Welcome everyone who's here. We have a few people coming in and I suspect a few more people on their way. We've got a couple of people in the waiting room. It would be great if you would write in the chat box where you're calling from. It would be great to see. And if you want to, it would be great to know what are you looking forward to in this webinar about the fear of feedback. I'm just doing a little tweak on my camera angle. There we go. This is the fear of feedback. It's a Rewiring Workplaces webinar, and I'll be saying a little bit more about that in a moment. And we've got Cirprian Arhire with me. I'm so excited that he's joined us, and I'll introduce him in just a moment. But just checking out the chat box. Feel free to put your name in if you want, where you're calling from, what you're looking forward to, if you would. Name, hello, and where you're calling from in the chat box would be nice, as we're just welcoming a few more people. Great. Hello, Steve Cliff.
Hello.
Okay, here we go. We've got a core group of people here. This is some of you I've noticed on our invitation list. People who've signed up for this. Some of you have been to some of our webinars before, perhaps quite a while ago. And I just wanted to introduce the new series that we're doing this year. It's called Rewiring Workplaces. Of course, we always have a neuroscience theme in pretty much everything we do, and a bit of systems work also. And this year we're working, the webinars that we have about monthly will be conversations. So instead of me talking to camera and trying to encourage all of you to talk with me, we're bringing in an expert from some part of workplace expertise, culture expertise, and culture development in organizations, and having a conversation. And this one today, of course, is about feedback and the fear of feedback, because as soon as you say the word feedback, it probably generates a little bit of fear in you, because that's kind of what happens. And I'm just looking at the chat box, seeing that we've got Steve from Portsmouth and Inga from Belgium. Hello, both of you. And Inga, you're looking forward to some tips on supporting them. And that's where we will end up in this conversation. So let me introduce Chip. I will call, so Cirprian Arhire. I think I'm getting close to pronouncing that properly, but we'll go with Chip during this conversation. I've invited Chip to this conversation because he is an expert in HR and all things HR and culture development. He's got an amazing background in all kinds of HR strategy and different aspects of HR, and he particularly focuses on workforce transformation programs and employee experience. I have a whole list of things here I could name. We're talking about HR operating model designs, AI-enabled workforce management, all of that's just really impressive collection of topics that Chip works on. I also want to say that Chip is the founder and chair for the CIPD Fellows and Senior People Professionals Network in London. And if you're not from London, CIPD is the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, and it is the HR organization. So Chip's like the man in the organization. So we know he knows his stuff. So Chip, would you please bring yourself here, and if there's anything else you want to add?
No, I think you've done a great introduction. I think I'm always a bit mindful of the word expert. It almost assumes like there's nothing else to learn, while I live my life by absorbing knowledge, interacting with HR professionals and business leaders as well, trying to understand more and more of where are we heading, what are some of the things beyond the curve, and how do we get organizations and the workforce forces better prepared for that future as well. So I think it's learning journey for every one of us.
Yeah, and I love that about what you do and how you interact, always learning and open to new ideas. And you just said they're also workplaces of the future. That's another focus of yours. Where are we going? Where are we going? And of course, we need to learn along the way in order to get where we're going, right? Because it's got to be different. We got to learn some new things. Just a few structural things for this conversation. Everyone who's here, you might want to we have your videos off, or we ask you to turn your videos off at about half past the hour. We may turn some videos on if you have some questions or comments that you want to make. And everyone else who's watching, you may want to click on your hide non-video participants option, which is in your video settings, hide non-video participants. Then you're just seeing the picture of the two of us and anyone who comes on camera. You don't need to see the tiny little thumbnails. And then we're only showing a couple of slides, so it'll mostly be Chip and myself on. So as we go through this conversation, we're going to be looking at what is feedback. When we talk about feedback and fear of feedback, what is it? And then what happens with feedback, and where does it go wrong, and why does it go wrong so often? And then we'll get some tips about what you can do to make feedback even better in your organization. So that's kind of our theme. Feel free to put questions in the chat box along the way. We'll be attending to them at about half past. Okay? So Chip, as we prepared for this conversation, you've told me a lot about your views on feedback and your experience with feedback. And I think we're pretty much on the same page that it just strikes fear into the heart of people when they hear the word feedback. But I'd just like to hear from you sort of generally, like, tell me about your, what you see is what is feedback and why do we need to bother?
Just thinking about what we mean by feedback, and if you go and just Google some definitions, some of the keywords that come up with feedback are around advice, criticism, or information, or the transmission of evaluative and corrective information. So it's all very procedural, very sort of focused on the not necessarily the human perspective of the relationship on feedback. Is more focused on the interaction between two loops of communication rather than how we build those relationships in our organizations.
Great. I'm going to pause you. I just want to pause you right there for a second, Chip, because I want to turn our videos off. But since you've given sort of a general definition, and it's just absolutely perfect, I think, for this question. So everyone who's here observing and participating in the way you participate, look at what do you find challenging about giving or receiving feedback? So as we talk about what is feedback, have this question in your mind, and we can loop back in at the end. What do you find challenging about giving or receiving feedback? So with that question in mind, I'm going to stop share.
Perfect.
And back to you.
And I think we're just talking about feedback and thinking almost like where it came from. I think a few decades ago, it made sense for that to be defined, for feedback to be defined like that, specifically as we were talking about industrial action and industries as a whole. And feedback was that loop back of communication, whether it was a process or related to individual performance. It hasn't necessarily been focused so much on how do we actually get the workforce of the future, how do we build the right level of relationships with our peers and our colleagues to be able to have the same direction of travel, or in some extent have different directions of travel in our own development. But I'm sure we're going to deep dive into that bit in a few minutes.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a little bit about this history, because I was doing a little bit of research on where did this come from. And as an engineer, I know well the mechanical versions of feedback. You have a thermometer or thermostat in your room, and it's set for 20 degrees, and it's measuring what's the temperature now, so I know what to do. So it has to have feedback. Oh, it's 22 degrees. Maybe I turn on the air conditioner, or maybe wait till it's 24. It's just feedback, which is really helpful, so it knows what to do. And then they went to, oh, well, this is really working in, let's use that concept in factories. And it was really helpful for tolerances and that kind of thing to give the factory workers, oh, these are out of tolerance over here. And feedback was really helpful. And then they thought, well, in the 50s, I think it was, let's bring this into the office place, so the white collar folks can have some of this. And they tried to box human characteristics into some kind of categories and try to give the same kind of feedback like this mechanical. And that, I don't know that it's ever really worked. And, because some of the studies on feedback or people try to implement feedback cultures, like they fail a bit. And hearing some of the definitions that you have and the way you're talking about it, so, well, no wonder that sounds so mechanistic, and we just need to find a new way.
Yeah,
or help
and I
people.
think just differentiating that from process to when we're talking to humans, we're trying to apply the same methodology of this is what, I don't know, Lean Six Sigma with less than 1% variation of error looks like in the process or manufacturing. And we're trying to apply the same type of principles in humans. And when we're talking about humans, we have so much diversity, so much richness, so much intrinsic desire to grow and to do better and to find different ways of doing things. So there's a lot of questions when we're talking about feedback. Is it actually advice? Is it stifling innovation? Is it creating and replicating the same model that might not support your business in the long term? And you're actually looking at people almost as being resources for the lack of a better word in that respect of uniform resources that all deliver on the same type of outcome with all the same amount of input. So I think we need to take ourselves outside of that perspective and think of organizations a bit more holistically, a bit more systems driven, a bit more of what are the multiple different cogs and the beauty of the different size and shape and colors of the cogs that make up this machine that should propel us into the future.
Yeah. And I'm thinking as you're saying that, it really takes some diversity mindedness, I don't know what else to say, in the person giving feedback, to see all the nuances of human beings in order to give real useful feedback. And that isn't always true. We're always learning and growing, and younger people in a workplace might not know what does expert look like, or what does high quality look like, and they're being forced to give feedback, which of course can be terrifying for them, giving feedback in an environment where they don't really know not just the mechanics of giving the feedback, but how do I see another human being and what they're doing well or not? It's challenging.
And even in that perspective, we're limiting feedback on what we understand about the organization and the context of the levels of work we're currently delivering. We're not basing feedback on the individual and their growth, because some part of their growth could be outside of the domain, could be job crafting, could be outside of the domain of the organization as well. And feedback should focus around some of those human intrinsic things of what is mine and my path alone, whether it's with this organization, whether it's with this business leader, or whether it's within this environment. But I think let's go back into some of the things that we started with feedback, and there's so many ways that it can go wrong, and I'm curious to learn from your perspective as well, because I have a few stories of where it can go really wrong as well.
Why don't you start with one of those stories, and then I'll do a little neuroscience thing, and I bet we can find some connections there.
Yes. So many stories about feedback, both in between individuals as well as you were mentioning, trying to embed the culture of feedback in organizations. And I think one of the things that we don't really understand when we're talking about feedback is that feedback is subjective. As much as we want it not to be, it is subjective. It is the observations of one individual over another. And that comes with the intrinsic biases that we have, first as the observer, but also the biases that the individual will have as the receiver of feedback, as the two parties in the relationship of feedback. As much as we think it's objective, as much as we're trying to dissociate it from circumstances and our beliefs and our context, it's still subjective. And it's this mechanism of we're asking an imperfect human being to provide imperfect feedback to another imperfect human being.
Yes.
And you ask yourself, what could go wrong?
What can't go wrong?
Yeah. So there's a lot of things that organizations have been abusing around feedback for decades, as you've mentioned. So they've used feedback almost like a mechanism to force people into specific shells and into their expectation of what the employee should be, should act like, should progress as, and this like very narrow and very forceful form of the perfect employee. Then we're talking about being used as almost like as a weapon within organizations. And I think one of my pet peeves is, I have some feedback for you, or can I give you some feedback? Those conversations are not necessarily as a starting point. That's not ever a sentence you want to start a conversation with someone, especially if there's no rapport, especially if there's no existing relationship, especially if there might not be trust in that specific relationship as well. So if someone that I've just met comes to me and say, I have some feedback for you, or can I provide you with some feedback, my immediate reaction is, no, thank you, I'm good. Good day. Rather than, actually, I might be interested in what this person has to say, because in all of the type of forms of feedback and all of the constructive ways of feedback that seem to be doing some level of progress and work, there's that element of, this is how you've made me feel as an individual. If I don't have any rapport with you, don't know you, don't understand your context, and you haven't even tried to do that for me, where's that connection that we're trying to build in?
Yeah. So really important foundation is to have a trusting relationship between two people. So there's one tip already, is, work on those relationships. Yeah. And in those, I loved how you described it, the imperfect human being giving imperfect feedback to the other imperfect human being. And I would add in emotional human beings, even if we don't want to admit it. So I'd like to share a slide for a moment. Let me make sure I got the right screen. You should be seeing a slide that says, be safe and certain, with a number of elements. Does that look right? So many people who come to my webinars, and I know, Chip, you know this because we were in a leadership development program and you saw this before also, this be safe and certain model gives us a guide in a lot of different situations for what goes wrong, what goes right, and what goes wrong, what creates motivation for people and what creates fear in people. And these 6 elements, so you can get dopamine out of these and feel good and motivation. But since we're talking about fear of feedback, we're mostly going to focus about the threat side of these. So when these are threatened, so if somebody's belonging is threatened, what that means is, I feel like this person might reject me. If I give feedback to them, they might reject me, or somebody's giving me feedback, it feels like rejection. It goes straight to our brains, but really goes to our heart, of adrenaline and cortisol and this fear that I don't belong, therefore I'm less than, therefore, keep going down the path, therefore I'm going to die, which is what the brain is programmed to do. You must belong or else. And so we're threatening, or perceived that we're threatening, belonging many times when giving feedback, receiving feedback. And so there's an inherent, very strong response there, fear response. Status is another one. Do I have the status to give this person feedback? Or what are they doing to my status as they give me feedback? That was an insult. So there could be a threat there. Autonomy. Wait a minute. I like doing things the way I do them. They're my way, and you're telling me I should do it differently. So there could be a threat to autonomy that way. Fairness is a really big one. And it creates really strong reactions in people if they think something's unfair. So if I have some feedback to give to you and I think you might think it's unfair, that makes me nervous. But if you get a piece of feedback that you think is unfair because someone was using it as a weapon, you mentioned that sometimes people go, I'll give you feedback, whack, it's really revenge and something. It creates this threat to fairness, creates that desire to get back at people, to get revenge. And that's some of the reasons that it's used as a weapon. Well, you didn't do something for me, so I'm going to get you back. Can I give you some feedback? Or I've given you some feedback in a really harsh way. You're going to want to get back at me. So we're run by these wanting to get back at impulses from the brain. Doesn't serve feedback at all. And then there's expectations. I'm going into a meeting and I think it's going to be great. And then you give me some feedback, which really hurts. I dive into disappointment. Or you're supposed to give feedback and you think other people's expectations will be smashed. So you feel sorry for them and don't want to do it. And then certainty, you never know what's going to happen out of a conversation. Go into a feedback conversation, and in teaching people how to give feedback, I've surprisingly often heard things, well, what if they cry? How do I give feedback to somebody? What if they cry? So there's this fear of the other person's going to respond in some way that I don't understand or I don't know how. And It does happen, of course, it does happen, but if you use some tools and you're in relationship and you've got that trust, it's much less likely. Anyway, here are some of the reasons why we fear feedback, is because it's all programmed in to be wary of those things.
Yes. So something just struck me as you were mentioning that of the fear that someone might cry, which basically in the mind of the person that provides feedback is absence of control.
Yes.
You don't have any level of control over someone that has exposed themselves in that level emotionally.
Yeah.
Because they might be heartbroken. As long as they don't show that in the workplace is fine.
Yeah.
The moment that they show that level, yeah, the moment that they show that, I think in what you were mentioning, something struck me with the sentence that sometimes is being used in formative feedback of don't take it personally.
Yeah.
Which just makes me giggle because feedback should be personal. It's about me. It's not about someone else. It's about me, the way I deliver work, the way I'm being perceived, the way I'm impacting the people around me and the relationships I have. This don't take it personally comes across almost like dissociate yourself as an individual from the work and what you do. So I can provide you feedback on the work and like, perfect, and that's feedback for the work. But feedback for me is for my own development. So I do have to take that personally. It's what you're providing me for. It's not feedback for Laurie, it's feedback for Chip.
Yeah, that's right. And all these brain things, they make it personal.
Yes.
You know,
yes.
even if you're watching someone give feedback to somebody else, you can still make it personal to yourself. We're always making things personal. So I agree with you. I like your two pet peeves. I'm kind of with you on those.
I think in HR, we've might have made things worse. Maybe not wise to say that on a recording, but I think we might have made things worse with asking people to do ratings around feedback on whether quarterly or annual performance or as often as they happen in organizations. So beyond just providing feedback of performance and development and areas of improvement, we're now trying to rate things in the same consistent way. We're also trying to force people to put all of their teams on a bell curve because we don't have an expectation of people in a specific team over exceeding expectation or underperforming in a mass. We all need to be on the same bell curve. So we're embedding all of these type of system things into our feedback that should be developmental, should be around the attitude and the skills and the intrinsic things that develop individuals. A lot of organizations go beyond that and they try to attach to like work performance and objectives. They try to attach personal development objectives, but those don't get scored in the same amount of strengths, don't count as much as the performance that you're providing within the agreed objectives of your day-to-day performance. Yeah. So there's all of these different stories of where feedback has gone wrong in organizations and how we're using it as a control mechanism or as a mechanism to keep people within their related roles and the expectations we have of what they should be doing in organizations. But there's so much that we can do with feedback, so much better.
Yeah. And as soon as we tie feedback to a stamp, I know I'm going to get feedback and it's formal feedback and it's going to be written and it's going to live in my file forever and it's tied to my bonus or my pay rise or, whatever. It adds pressure to the brain, to the mind, to the heart, to be like, wow, this is really, really intense. And it seems to me if we gave feedback more often, we worked on those trusting relationships and we understand how to give feedback that's effective and did it more often and included a lot more positive, appreciative kind of feedback. Seems like it would just go a lot further. It'd be a lot easier.
I think that's part of why a while ago we've tried to move towards 360-degree feedback to get like a complete view of an individual and not just have that one perspective. But in some regards, I feel like that has backfired a little bit because in a lot of organizations, 360 feedback is more of a popularity contest than actually how well I'm performing, or what are some of the objectives, or how true I am to my own career path and my own developmental objectives. So I don't share my development objectives with my peers. I share them with people that actually work with me on achieving those objectives. So why should they be able to rate them?
Yes. Right. And so then there's that whole 360 that contributes, mostly uninformed by what the objective was.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's more of how much do I like these individuals to score them highly on some of these things? Because if I like them, then I pay attention to them. There, I might observe some of the behaviors that they're asking me to evaluate, rather than if I don't like them, all of my biases come across of them not being enough, being less than average, or anything else.
Yeah, of course. Imperfect human beings with imperfect yeah, lots of subjectivity just adding up to all our biases. So should we start leading the conversation to, well, if I were listening to this conversation, I might just be depressed. Let's just walk away from it. But let's talk about what we can do. What we can do to make it a little bit better, to make it a little bit more palatable, so people can give feedback better, receive feedback better, ask for feedback more easily. Because those are,
I think those three areas that you've mentioned are crucial, of understanding the distinction and what's required for all those three areas. So asking, giving, and receiving feedback as an individual will be part of taking all of those three different roles in organizations. And feedback in all of those different areas it's a learned behavior. So you can train, you can do better, you can explore, you can even ask feedback on how you're giving, receiving, or asking for feedback from people that you trust and people you're working with on your own development. So I think it's not like it's a doomed subject. It's an area of development. It's an area that a lot of energy and a lot of folks go in organizations, because regardless of all of the bad things that we've mentioned, as organizations, as society, and as individuals, we need to do better when it comes to feedback. So there's specific things of the right environment, the right time, the right context, the right format of providing feedback in that regard. And I'm just going to mention a few that are on the top of my head.
Yeah.
That when we're providing or asking feedback, we need to choose the right setting and environment. So feedback is a personal thing that you're providing individuals with. It's not done in a forum with other individuals, so where they are in the middle of a meeting. You're not stopping the meeting to provide feedback in a public forum for someone else. Mm-hmm. You are providing that in a one-to-one conversation in a safe space that you're creating. So that safe space word, I'm going to pick up on that in a little bit as well.
Okay.
Second one is do it timely. It's been 6 months since the incident or since the time that you wanted or noted some feedback. Don't care about it. It happened six months ago. It could be a lifetime ago. As long as there's areas of improvement, as long as even if it's a praise as a feedback, and you want to provide that you've seen significant improvement and you see that I'm on the right path, or the individual's on the right path, provide it to them then, because it's a fuel for some of the things that they'll be heading and doing next. You do not want to waste weeks, months, years, wait for the annual appraisal that happens at the end of the year to provide that feedback. Do it then when as fast as you've observed the behavior, you observed the improvement, or I don't know, a mistake or anything else that could happen in the workplace.
And I would just add a little bit. I'm pretty sure you would agree with if you're in a meeting with somebody and something goes horribly wrong for this person, as you walk out of the room, that is as soon as possible, but really that's probably not the best time, because they're probably in self-critical mode.
Yes.
So there is a bit of, asking yourself, when is the right time for this person? Possibly the next morning or the next day, or even 2 days later might even be better, so that they're in a place where they can hear it now.
Yeah, or asking them what's preferred for them as well. because they might just want 15 minutes run of everything that went wrong into that meeting. They might already be aware of everything that you might tell them. And you offering that listening ear is actually doing better than even trying to provide them with feedback in that moment. So that level of safety of you're not actually providing constructive or negative feedback to someone who's already in that environment where they might be attacking themselves on some of the things that went wrong as well. I think another thing that is on my mind is around this positive intent of feedback. So we went from feedback being a weapon and being a mechanism into actually feedback is a gift. Me as an individual, I ask for feedback from people that know, care, and understand me, understand what's my ambition for my career, who I want to become as an individual and my identity, and they understand that context. So I'm asking them to contribute to my own development and to my own growth. When I provide feedback, I also do the same. I invest time to observe the behavior and the areas that the person is trying to develop or observe or understand. I go in and I say, from my perspective, this is some of the things you've asked me to observe and look at. And then I provide them with the feedback, which I position with, this is my perspective. So my perspective and my perception of some of these things. Obviously, if we already have a report, you might care about some of those things, or you might just take it with, this is Chip's perspective, which is good. It's informative. It might be positive, negative, constructive, any type of adjective that you want to attach to it. But it's Chip's perspective. I can take it with me, write it down, use it, not use it, whatever it is. But it is a gift. And as a gift, you can receive it, you can store it, you can return it. You can do whatever you want with.
Save it for later.
Yes.
I think it's really important, this bit about asking for feedback. Here's some criteria I'm looking for. Just again, considering the brain, our attention is all over the place. So if you say to me before a meeting, I'd like to get feedback from you after the meeting, I'm going to be paying attention to things that I'm interested in. And to the things that happen in the meeting, and I'm in control of my attention, and it's all over. But if you give me 2 or 3 things that you want me to look for, man, is that helpful? Because then I can pay attention to those things, and I might not notice those. That you're working on your elocution, during the meeting, or your storytelling, or whatever it is. I might not even notice, and then what a miss. Then it's a random gift, as opposed to a very well thought through gift.
I think that's almost like the difference between working on your strengths and trying to turn everybody else into the same individual.
Yes.
Because that generic feedback with, can you tell me how to be a better employee here? Sure, here are some objectives, you're doing well or not against those. These are some of the expectations. You need to wear a tie or a suit. As you see, 80% of our workforce wear a suit, therefore they seem to be excelling. You should try to fit in to that, rather than actually, these are some of the things you're really good at. You've identified that in yourself and you put them on your improvement plan. You just need more exposure to them. And you've asked me to join you into calls or into meetings or into conferences and listen to you and understand what's happening. And then as we're working together through some of those things, I'm providing you with feedback of my perception of how some of those things are landing.
Yeah, my perception of those. Yeah, nice.
Yeah, I think that element of, regardless whether I'm the line manager of the individual or they are my line manager, that phrasing of my perception is crucial, because it's not feedback that you went around the building or around the organization to gather this anonymous box of complaints or an anonymous box of praises. Is your perception over the individual that you've been asked to observe, and you're giving your time towards improving them. And one of the things that happened throughout my career is that as I was working with individuals and line managing them, I had to provide them with feedback of, actually, you're at the point where the organization can no longer offer you the opportunities to grow and progress. And with your career aspiration and everything else, this is as much as we can do. Like, we can try to actually get you to excel at some of these things. But honestly, as the line manager and as a person that has looked after your development, I think it's more useful for you to actually look for opportunities that focus more on some of your strengths and some of the areas you want to develop. And those are bit heartbreaking conversations to have with individuals, where you spend years with them, supporting them, growing it, and creating friendship beyond just a working relationship. But they're the right type of conversations we should be having with individuals of how do we support the development of others around us, regardless of some of the boundaries of our organizations. And I know I'm going to get a few slaps over my wrist of saying this, as the feedback in organizations and performance management are created to retain individuals rather than to support them to leave and find aspiring careers. But when you get to that level of maturity, of understanding, yes, all of organizations are not perfect machines. They will not constantly create careers for individuals. If you look at all of the matrices and all of the structures, there's not enough leadership positions in organizations for everybody in the organizations to be aspiring into that. No. So naturally, some of the people need to leave and return, or find opportunities that actually speak more to what they are trying to become and who they are trying to become. So that identity of individuals.
So it's not about inviting people to leave, of course, but just being honest and transparent. Let's look at this organization, and here are the paths up, and it doesn't look like any of those are going to be opening up anytime soon, or whatever I think honesty. Yeah, and I think that's hard for some people, just to be honest about that. It's like, oh, but I'm supposed to keep them.
Yeah. Some of my best conversations have been about how in the current organizations that I was in, there wasn't the right opportunity for me to take on further. Yeah. And there was nothing expected to open up in the future, and maybe with the right place and time for me to actually find an opportunity external that speaks more to what I love and what I enjoy doing.
Yeah. So in a minute or soon, I want to open it up to other people. Are there other tips, Chip, that you have for people on how to give, receive, or ask for feedback?
Yes. So we've talked about sort of creating a safe space and maybe even psychological safety a bit earlier, and we touched on it. And it's important that whenever you're providing, giving, or asking feedback, you're trying to create that environment. So feedback already has a bad rep, as we're talking through this. It's creating that environment where even for when you're asking feedback, it's safe to provide me with feedback. I am understanding and trying to create the right environment for us to have constructive conversations about what works, what doesn't, what some of the areas of improvement, what works well, and how people are perceiving me and you as an individual that I care about. There's one level of thought around feedback, that's about, there seems to be a lot of advice into providing feedback. A lot of, when I was your age and when I was in your shoes, this is what I was doing, and this is what I was thinking about, and this is how I became who I am today, 10 years later. Well, I think we should ban that completely. I think we should ban that level of advice within feedback. Feedback should be, this is your career progression, and this is how the market is moving at the moment. Different context, different environment. You might be able to progress faster. You might not even have the same aspirations of progressing in the same direction. So how do we open a conversation about that, of what works best for that individual in their preferred way as well? What else? Be mindful of conversations of overrating people, and this is always a painful one, as a lot of systems and a lot of organizational procedures ask you to provide feedback and then rate them on whether they meet, exceed, or excel, or meet expectations or excel at their job. It's a tricky conversation, and my advice is to separate those completely. Separate feedback that should be developmental, should be around the individual, should be around their career progression and everything else that they're doing. The rating is how much of their objectives have they achieved? Is it 100%? Is it 120, or is it above that? Or whatever conversations you want to have, but separate those completely. And my advice is to never have those in the same meeting. So let feedback dial in, let feedback be conversational, let the person think and reflect over the feedback that they've received, and how they will act on it or not, or what's useful for them or not in that conversation. And then separately have a conversation about the end of year rating or quarterly or whatever the organization asks of you as a rating. I think that the last piece that I want to add is, again, to that element of feedback is a gift, is feedback should come from our innate desire of developing and supporting other people. If you're not ready to go on that route with someone, if you don't, honestly, and it happens, if you don't care enough of the development of that individual to provide them with constructive feedback, then don't. It's okay to say no. It's, if someone asks you if they can provide you with if you can provide them with your feedback, you can also say no. You say there are other people that I'm sure that they've been focusing more on your development in the organization than myself. Pass the opportunity to someone else. Yeah.
And that takes a certain amount of bravery to do that. Say, I'm not the right one.
Yeah.
Somebody might be begging you. You might be in a really important role in the conversation, in the organization, that please give me feedback, give me feedback. Well, I'm not the right one.
Yeah. Not right now. Like, I haven't spent enough time with you to observe all of the things you would want to observe. But if this is the start of the conversation, yes, tell me what's on your development plan and what you're working towards. What is it specifically that you want me to observe? Am I the right person to absorb all of those things? Like, someone will ask me about attention to detail. Yes, they might have it better than me, but when it comes to that, or other areas, like, I don't pay attention to some of those things. It does not come naturally to me to even observe them in other people. So give me something that talks to me, that I can observe, that I can support in those areas.
Great. Well, I'm curious if there are other people on the call here who would like to, if you have other tips that you want to share, or questions for Chip, anything you want to contribute? You want to come on camera? That would be great, or write in the chat box. I'm just noticing there is a chat that's been happening over here a little bit. So while people think about that, ultimately feedback is about helping a person grow and develop, Tina is asking. I hold it that way, that feedback is about growing and developing, giving them a next place to look, having them know themselves more for the sake of growth and development. For me, that's what it's all about. I suppose there could be some other things at play, but it seems like all for the sake of, how do I know myself so I can do my job better, or I can develop as a human being? Yeah.
And to that extent, is being extended to performance, but performance is still about growth and development and achieving those objectives.
Great. Steve, I see your camera's on. Would you like to say something? You're on mute at the moment, though. Something's, Fuda in the background, can you, so here we go. I think if I ask you to unmute, I think that works. There we go.
Okay. Yeah, I was, I guess what's going on in my mind, and maybe it's because of what's been going on for me kind of recently, is more of that informal feedback. And I've had an example where somebody's been quite critical about something, and you listen and you hear and you kind of take it all in. And then you start to think, well, I don't quite agree with all of that. So at some point I make a decision. I made a decision to say, well, can I give you some feedback? And of course the response is, well, yes, of course. And so you give some feedback, all in the, in a kind, gentle, calm way. And then you find that the person gets extremely defensive, because I think once somebody is in that kind of mode of giving feedback, often it becomes a lot about them.
Yeah.
And so when you challenge back in the, try to have that honest two-way conversation and dialogue, then sometimes you get the defensiveness that you weren't expecting.
Yeah.
So it takes a lot of courage to actually, I find, challenge back. When someone's giving you perhaps some unsolicited feedback or advice or criticism or whatever it is, and you believe that actually a deeper conversation is pretty valuable. So I'm here, I'm up for it. And then you find the other person isn't.
Yeah. So they've started giving you feedback and you want to give them feedback about how they're giving you feedback.
Kind of, yeah.
And then they're not up for that. I think what's in my head, now this is of course personal perspective and ideal situation. It's like, okay, person who's giving me feedback, I get that you want to give me feedback. Is that right? And I'm not able to take it in at the moment because it feels very critical. Could I ask you to give feedback to me in a different ways? So like shape them as the feedback giver rather than now I'm giving you feedback. That's what occurs to me. What does that sound like to you, Steve?
Yeah, no, it was pretty much what comes up quite commonly. I think human beings generally like to give advice.
Yes.
It's all good intentions. Everyone's trying to be helpful. So it's not feedback that's been agreed, or it's not really feedback, it's more advice.
Yes.
Sometimes you get so much advice that you think, do you know what? Can I give you some feedback that I don't need all that advice?
Can I set some boundaries around what comes at me?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, and advice is okay. It's fine. It comes from our desire to leave a mark in the world. It does not come from my desire to support you as an individual with the context that you're in. Yeah. I think there's a song with Wear More Sunscreen that says similar things about advice. With advice comes from a good place, but is sometimes mispositioned.
Yeah, no, exactly.
I'm going to try to remember the lyrics by the end of this.
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, it could be a longer conversation, but I thought it was interesting. I guess the place where I was going was more of that kind of informal, spontaneous feedback moment, where either someone's giving you feedback or you want to give them feedback, and it's kind of how you handle that in the moment thing rather than the planned, feedback.
Yeah, and depends where your mindset is as well. If you're prepared to take on that feedback as well, because you can say, thank you very much, let's schedule a later call. Right now I'm just in my own head giving myself feedback on how this just went. Really happy to hear you 2 days from now if we can formulate these, and these are some of the things that I would want us to have a conversation around. So you're already giving them direction, you're asking them to do their homework and to write notes, so they don't come with a convoluted thinking of what they perceived and what their advice is, and they start shaping it into a manner that might be useful.
Yeah. It's a two-way. I think we have to all remember it's a two-way conversation. There has to be openness to receive feedback. There has to be the trust in the relationship, and there has to be intention by the feedback giver.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that, it's probably going to go wrong, or likely to. I don't know about probably, but
yeah. I think the good advice is, I think you said that somewhere along the way, is just take a deep breath, pause, and give everybody time to come back to it after some mindfulness or a good night's sleep.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm always bringing in the mindful bit. Whether you're a feedback receiver or giver, take a breath, make it a mindful moment before you start, because otherwise you might be operating out of your own needs. With my need to look good, so then I give you advice because this is how it was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So helpful. We need to be our best selves in feedback conversations. They're gifts, as Chip was saying. Yeah.
And advice sometimes comes with what's useful for them and their perspective, rather than what's useful for me. And I've spent the past few years of being a consultant, and I come with the consulting agenda. Sometimes advising organizations on how they need to change their advice back, and their forceful feedback is how they should remain the same and maintain the status quo. I'm like, Okay, let's have a deeper conversation about it. Session 1, session 5, session 10. Are we getting there?
Yeah. I'd like to share with the audience about how we at Shook Svensson are training people in feedback, and just talk about our communication program. That's all right. We have most people probably on this call. Are we seeing the Rewired to Communicate? Yes? Okay, thank you. Usually it has a green box around that screen over there. So Rewired to Relate is a program that a lot of people have heard about, but we have and Rewired to Lead and Rewired to Communicate. These are all interconnecting pieces. And Rewired to Communicate is 3 different programs. It starts with Rewired to Relate. So we understand our own emotions and these needs that we've been talking about. Because if I'm a manager and I'm giving, and I have this need to belong, I'm not going to be very good at giving feedback, because I'm always wanting the other person to like me. And so we start understanding in Rewired to Relate about what are my personal needs, how does that impact our relationship, how do I calm myself, have those mindful moments so that I can come from a grounded place. And this is just general, be great in relationship. And then we get into great conversations, which is about how do I listen, and understanding our attention is so small compared to all the information that can come in. And so pointing our attention is a really important place. That's why this bit about, here, please give me feedback about these 3 items is really crucial. Otherwise, I'm all over the place. So great conversation is really about, how do you point your attention? How do you listen? How do you really listen? 14 other things going on in your brain, or 14,000, trying to grab your attention. How do you focus and listen? And then difficult conversations are all about how do you have feedback conversations? How do you have clean up conversations for things that have gone wrong? Again, based on the Be Safe and Certain model that I showed a little bit ago, where this model is a thread through the whole program. How do these drivers impact my ability to communicate, impact my ability to give feedback, impact my ability to receive feedback? And if we can calm ourselves and step out of our threat mode or even our need for rewards, our conversations are going to be so much better. We can start developing those relationships, trusting relationships where we have the psychological safety to have the conversations. So those are the three modules that are in the Rewired to Communicate program. It all starts, as you can see here, starts with Rewired to Relate. We are running a Rewired to Relate that starts on the 5th of May, if you're interested in that, or you have colleagues that are interested in that. And Frodo's putting in the chat box, Rewired to Relate program description. But on Wednesday, we have, on Wednesday, we have a What is Rewired to Relate. So if you want to come and find out more about the program, you can do that. But let me just say a few words. We just finished a program last week, and I'm thrilled always with the kind of feedback that we get. The personal changes that people make, the surprise they have at how much they learn from the program. Well, I didn't know about this about myself, that I'm so needing autonomy and I'm not getting it in these situations. No wonder it's frustrating for me. Those kind of awarenesses, those kind of inner urges, inner needs, people are recognizing, and also recognizing the needs in partners and friends and colleagues, and how easy it is to shift oneself a little bit to help others get their needs met. Because that makes our conversations go better, that makes our feedback go better, it makes our relationships more trusting. And anyway, we're getting lots of really, really great feedback. The program itself is, so understanding your brain, learning to work with your emotional brain, managing stress, that's another aspect of that. Because as stress comes in, our brain doesn't work as well. We're on adrenaline and cortisol. It makes giving feedback, receiving feedback, building trust, all of those things, it makes it all harder. So there's also an element, very strong element, important element about managing stress. Program is 6 weeks long. There are different elements to it. We've tried to optimize all the kind of learning modes. We have bite-sized learning, online learning, bite-sized, you just go and watch a video, read a little bit, and then there are practices, you make it real, and then you meet with a group, so you can use social learning. That's part of the program, most people say. Talk about what you've been practicing, listen to other people's perspectives and their applications, and that's the sharing is the heartwarming place for one thing, but it's also very enlightening for people to deepen their understanding about the concepts. And then, as I mentioned, this Wednesday, we have What is Rewired to Relate. So I go through in more detail. So if you're at all interested in Rewired to Relate for yourself or someone in your organization or for teams that you work with, or even if you're a coach and you're interested in supporting your teams, come to the conversation on Wednesday. Let's just put that link in. And we have a great conversation for about an hour just talking about the program. So that's that. We have another Rewiring Workplaces next month, which is about recovery, burnout recovery. So I'm bringing in a specialist on burnout recovery, and we're going to be a conversation about how do people get burnt out, how stress is we're just filling up with stress and the impact on people and organizations. But in our last couple of minutes, thank you everyone for watching those. Check the chat box for the links to the programs for more information. Chip, it's been fantastic to have you here. It feels like we could have talked about feedback and giving feedback and creating the best scene for feedback for hours. But I appreciate that you were here for this hour, especially since you are on holiday in Thailand. I meant to mention that at the beginning, and it's already dark over there. I'm just wondering if there's any final words or questions or comments from anybody, or from you, Chip. All right then. Well, let's give everyone 3 minutes back of their day or evening. Thank you again, Chip. I really appreciate you being here. Thanks everyone for coming. We'll see you next time.